All right, let's stick to the offensive line and let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about offensive tackle because there are questions about whether Spencer Brown should be the starting right tackle for the Buffalo Bills
God,
in
he's awful.
2023. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, are the Buffalo Bills going to go out in free agency and find a veteran to compete and give Spencer Brown another shot? And if Spencer Brown fails, you have the sort of fail safe there. Or do the Buffalo Bills look to the draft? Because there are some stud right tackle only prospects.
Mhm.
DeJuan Jones and Darnell Wright are two of my favorite prospects in this draft class.
Wright's my
I think
favorite so far. Yeah.
I think that they are plug and play day one starting right tackles and could probably start at like right tackle for a decade. Like I'm not saying they're Ryan Ramczyk from for the New Orleans Saints. I don't think that's not my comp for them, but it's just like you're going to draft them on the late first round. I think Ramczyk went later for the Saints and they're just going to be there forever. And they're just going to be your right tackle forever and they're going to be good. So DeJuan Jones and Darnell Wright are the first two that really stood out to me in the Senior Bowl at tackle. You obviously have the tackle guard guy in Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse. I know our guy David Fox was all over that. He was all over Wanya Morris from Oklahoma, another tackle guard, flexible guy. And then again, there was a ton of names at tackle in the Senior Bowl, but none of them really stuck out to me. The only one I really added to my list here was Jalen Duncan, just because the upside, but I almost feel like that's another Spencer Brownish type of move, like an upside raw tackle prospect. So I even wince a little bit at the thought of a Jalen Duncan, but who stood out to you the most in Mobile?
Well, I think the first question we have to ask is like, what are our priorities, right? As far as this offensive line, is it addressing the interior first? Are we that concerned about right tackle that we would consider replacing Spencer Brown? And in the Cover One group chat, I think like Greg and others put it best. It's like we shouldn't say we're like pigeonholing ourselves out of taking a certain position just because we hope and think that there's a good athlete on the team that has like a bright future. Like we think Spencer Brown could be good, but he hasn't been that great, and he was a third round pick. Like, don't double down on your mistake by not taking somebody that's a stud because of what you think Spencer Brown might become, and he hasn't in 2 years from a small school. So for me, it's Jones and Wright. To me, those are the two guys that are at the top of my list as far as like realistic options. Obviously, you're probably not going to get guys like Johnson, coming down the board at that point. So ultimately, like, this is where I've struggled because Jones and Wright to me, well, maybe Wright and you could get in day two. I think probably you could actually, now that I think about it. But Jones, you might not be able to, right? Like
I
Jones
think
is like,
both of those guys, you got 27 or bust. I think both
yeah.
of them. I think Wright is playing his way into round one as
So
well.
so again, free agency will dictate a lot of what happens here. Are the Bills able to get some kind of veteran depth, like a Will Hernandez maybe at guard in free agency, that would then maybe put the priority to a guy like Jones or Wright at 27 if the
Yeah.
Bills felt so inclined to do that. So I do think free agency, even though it's been kind of said by Brandon Beane that we're not going to be super splashy in free agency, like just from a numbers game, look, Saffold's a UFA, Quessenberry, UFA, Van Roten, UFA. Like you're going to have to patch some of these holes in free agency on this offensive line. You just, from a numbers game, you have to. So I think that will dictate probably a lot of where we might think of priorities when it comes to the draft. But yeah, those guys, Wright and Wright and Jones, excuse me, for me. Johnson's not probably going to be there. So those would be the two for me. But yeah, it's hard to say right now because I've just like fallen in love with so many of these guys that, like, of course, I'm going to get my hopes dashed again.
Yeah, we got a question coming in saying, what do you think of Carter Warren out of Pitt? He's an intriguing prospect. I don't know if I would buy into him any later than the fourth round. Age is a concern at 25. Injury history is a concern. He's got, and he's got some lower body issues and he's not the strongest in the lower body, but he's got length and he's got size and he's a noted pass blocker from his time at Pitt. So a guy like Carter Warren is super interesting to me. And I know we just talked about like Trey Smith and we talked about Jamari Salyer and like not overthinking things and not underdrafting players. I still think like you wouldn't be underdrafting Carter Warren if you took him in the 4th round. Like, I'm not like Trey Smith fell to the 6th. I wouldn't let a guy like Carter Warren fall to the 6th, but I do think like the 4th round would be a range for a guy like him. The guy that intrigues, first of all, I want to go back to Darnell Wright and DeJuan Jones for a second. If we have a chance to pull the trigger on one of those two at pick 27, I will not blame Brandon Beane for 1 second if he pulls the trigger on either of those guys at 27. Like, Darnell Wright is probably my favorite prospect in this entire draft class, like, period, of any position. I think that dude is an absolute stud. DeJuan Jones is a physical freak, and we've seen his ability to pass block and keep a guy like CJ Stroud clean for all of those years at Ohio State. I think those two things are like almost like sure bets at pick 27. And if you take them, like, that opens up some possibilities for Spencer Brown. You can use him as that TE3, that Bobby Hart role last year, and you can still put him on the field a ton, and you can utilize him as a run blocker. He's also an athletic dude. So now you have an athletic guy to play with as a backup. Left tackle, right tackle, swing. You can work him on both sides and you can get him comfortable on both sides. So you have a really solid backup there, because guess what? Injuries happen in the National Football League. We saw that to the Cincinnati Bengals, who had to start Jackson Carman at left tackle in the playoffs. That could easily happen to the Buffalo Bills. So if you have a guy like Spencer Brown who sits on the bench all year, but is in practice and through training camp working left tackle, right tackle, left tackle, right tackle, maybe he can show up in a pinch if somebody gets hurt and he can actually play well, despite the fact that he has struggled so far throughout his career.
And I mean, just from a positional value standpoint, like, regardless of the Bills' need, right? Right tackle is a stud right tackle, just from a volume and from a positional value standpoint, is going to be harder to find than a guy that can be serviceable on the interior. So I get, from a positional value standpoint, taking like the team needs out of the equation, right tackle is more valuable. A great right tackle is more valuable and is harder to find than someone that you could put on the interior, at right guard or wherever that may be. So I'm with you on that approach, right? Like, obviously free agency will dictate it as well, but like, Wright is a stud. So, I mean, I'm with you on that. It's time for the Bills to really invest the right way in this offensive line, and it can't be patchwork. I mean, Hansel put that great graphic up the other day with like the depth chart of just Brandon Beane draft picks, right, for rookies, and how the team would look, and it was obvious the biggest weakness from drafting has been the offensive line, and the one stud that was there, Wyatt Teller, is obviously no longer with the team.
And here's the joke from Steve Rose here: just don't trade Spencer Brown to the Cleveland Browns.
Oh my God, he'll turn into an All-Pro, right?
The last two guys I really want to touch on is, I think Matthew Bergeron and Wanya Morris are two guys that I would not be surprised if they're on the Buffalo Bills radar. Both of these, I think Matthew Bergeron is a 2nd rounder. I think Wanya Morris is more of a 3rd rounder. He could maybe test his way at the combine into the 2nd round because he is an athletic dude out of Oklahoma, left tackle, right tackle, flex. But I think both of these guys sort of fit the archetype of someone that Aaron Kromer could be interested of moving inside to guard. So if they do draft a Matthew Bergeron, if they do draft a Wanya Morris, I don't think they'll be drafting them to play tackle. I think they'll be drafting them to play guard. Really, the only two tackles, and I haven't had a chance to look too deeply into the underclassmen. I know Anton Harris, the other tackle from Oklahoma, is a possibility. I haven't had a chance to look too much into him yet. Really, outside of DeJuan Jones and Darnell Wright, I don't see much in terms of plug and play right tackle in this draft class. So if you're looking to replace Spencer Brown right now, it's Jones and Wright, and Bergeron and Morris are more of these versatile chess pieces that you probably consider kicking into the interior.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
And then Shrine Bowl again. I want to give a shout out to some Shrine Bowl guys. This is a like a 5th, 6th round pick, like a Tommy Doyle type, but I'm really big fan of Connor Galvin from Baylor. I think he's a name to keep an eye on. He's a athletic, bigger guy. So keep an eye out and keep an ear out for Connor Galvin out of Baylor. He's an interesting one, but I just don't know how much the Buffalo Bills need another Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle type. So keep an ear out. He's an exciting player to me. I just don't know how much interest a team like the Buffalo Bills would have.